Welcome to Richer Soul, Dr. Emma Seppala. It's great to have you join us today.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
And I'm excited for the conversation. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
I grew up in France and in Paris, which sounds really romantic, but actually the philosophy on the streets is quite negative, or at least it was when I grew up. There's always a sense that nothing's ever possible, you're never good enough. That was really the overarching sense. And yet when you look at France, they have everything, right? This beautiful, incredible culture and literature and free school, free healthcare, every Catholic vacation, every national vacation, and plenty of strikes on top of that. I mean, there's just beautiful food and it's an incredible place. And yet there is this sense on the inside of never enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not being aware of or grateful for what we do have, what they do have, right? And so that really was very interesting to me because after France, I came to the US for college and saw, wow, here people are so much more positive. And it made me feel, wow, your mental state is your wealth. But I also saw that in the US, people work themselves into the ground. And there's a sense of suffering there. And then after the US, I went to China for 2 years after college, and I saw people who had nothing and were grateful for everything and were so resilient. And there's such an inner strength there. And I realized, wow, we think of outer wealth as being what we need to feel secure in life, but you could have all the wealth in the world, not be grateful for any of it, and it serves you nothing. And you could have nothing and have that inner wealth, that inner sovereignty, which is why my new book's called Sovereign, that inner sovereignty. And you have more power and happiness than others who have so much on the outside.
That makes a lot of sense. We've had many guests on, and we've talked about how the people who had literally nothing always seemed happy, and the people who had it all always seemed miserable. And it seems like you've experienced much of the same. So, did your parents or school teach you much about money as you were growing up, or was that just not even a topic of consideration?
I had some friends who would talk about, oh, this person's house, they must have so much money. And whenever I would bring that up, my parents would say, don't think about, like, don't, they would tell me, don't talk about that. So they were never telling me. It was kind of like, this is not something that we should focus on. So.
Okay. And I'm assuming school didn't teach you much either.
No.
No. So you came here for college. What was your undergrad? You did undergrad and grad because you're a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So you've done
Yeah.
quite a bit of education. What's your background here?
I comparative literature is what I did in college. I came from Europe. I spoke several languages, and it was a comfort zone for me. I was already moving out of my country of origin. It was enough of an adaptation. So I went into that. I also loved literature and which makes sense now that I became a writer. Also. So I had that, and then after China, I did a master's degree in East Asian Studies at Columbia with this idea of wanting to explore this idea of inner wealth, this inner sovereignty aspect more. And then I went into psychology because I thought, okay, how can I help people attain this now through research? And so that's been my journey and then eventually as I got through grad school, I thought, let me also write because I want people to now have this knowledge that I've gained, that the science, I've researched through the science. So that's been how I've thought about how can I share this, because people need to learn how to create more of that inner wealth, that inner sovereignty.
And that's a perfect topic for us.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll chat about it. Before we do, though, you're currently at Yale. You're a professor there, correct?
Yep. I teach leadership, emotional intelligence, positive leadership, and so forth to executives that come through the Yale School of Management.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, these days it seems education's on the front lines. It's for a variety of reasons, the cost, all of the other turmoil that seems to be going on. And on top of that, we have a changing world in which what we need to learn and how we can learn has dramatically shifted, I would say, in the last 10, maybe 20 years. Because when I grew up, knowledge was gold. Today, knowledge is free. You can get any piece of knowledge you want. Half the time it's figuring out what's true, what's not, what's the true truth and what's a partial truth. And so I think there's a massive shift going on. What are you hearing and seeing in your institution?
I think there's a democratization happening, which is great. I think more underprivileged students are gaining access to these bigger name schools that used to be mostly for the elite or the wealthy. But also, like you said, knowledge is everywhere. Just the other day, I met someone who he didn't have any education, and he saw this ad to be an electrician and for a specific type of thing, and he watched a YouTube video or two on it and went and applied for the job, got the job, exercised his profession, and then his colleague was like, "Hey, you want to start our own business doing this exact thing?" He now started his own business. He's not just super successful. It all started with the YouTube video and a will to do something to support his family. And I think that democratization also helps in terms of just being able to spread knowledge. Like you said, as long as you have access to the right knowledge. And I think there's more and more interest among students as well to not just learn scholarly knowledge and practical knowledge, but also to ask questions like, well, what is happiness? What's a meaningful life? What is this life about? Things that are not addressed, have not really been addressed in colleges, and are starting to, because the students are asking, well, what is it that we want to be educated in,
And it's true. Those topics, along with money and I guess they teach you how to be successful, but I know you found a lot of conflict in what success really is, as far as what is true. Again, going back to it, there's all this information, but a lot of it isn't actually the case. And so it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I was on a Facebook group for Yale alumni, and there was an innocent prompt that was, what's your profession and how would you advise someone who wants to get there? Presumably to help younger alumni. It was incredible to see the comments. Nobody answered the actual question. They just mentioned what their job was, how much they hated it, and advised younger alumni not to do things for prestige or money. Mostly were physicians and lawyers. And it was unbelievable. And I was like, wow, so many people who fell for this idea, I must do things for prestige and money. They were told it, or they did it for whatever reason. And then they're looking back on their life. They hate their life. It's like, is that wealth? I don't know. I don't think so. And so it's just really telling, the messaging we've received that has told us to do things and think a certain way and do things a certain way and become certain things. They are not the answer that we're looking for. And 70% of people go to their deathbed regretting not living the life they wanted. That's why I wrote my book, Sovereign, because I was just like, we have to rethink these things early on and not be one of those.
And so the book is called Sovereign: Reclaim Your Freedom, Energy, and Power in a Time of Distraction, Uncertainty, and Chaos, which, I can relate to all of those. What was the inspiration behind this book?
Yeah. So I teach high-level executives at Yale School of Management that come in. They're either sent by their corporation or they come in for some of our open enrollment programs. And I would see these really talented, successful people coming through. And often I would see that the biggest thing standing between them and where they wanted to be were some of these beliefs and behaviors that were standing in their way of that I call, that create a bound state that prevented them from accessing their fullest potential. Let me give you an example. When I ask my audiences, how many of you are self-critical, 90 to 95% of the room raises their hand. So I ask, what kind of words do you say to yourself when you make a mistake? And usually the words they say are, you're such an idiot, and worse, like terrible words that people tear themselves apart with. And when you look at the data, self-criticism leads to anxiety, depression, fear of failure, less willingness to try again. I mean, basically the opposite of resilience, the opposite of what you want as a leader. And whenever I look at those individuals in the room who do not raise their hand, they show up so powerful. So powerful. When you look at the data, when you have a more life supportive relationship with yourself, you actually end up better mental health, better physical health, better relationships and ability to connect with others, better cognitive skills like memory, attention, and creativity. I mean, the list goes on. And yet, this is another form of social conditioning or programming, whatever you want to call it, that we've bought into. That's false. And I differentiate between self-criticism, which is basically beating yourself up, shaming yourself, and self-awareness. Self-awareness is like, oh, my stats aren't that great. I need help in stats, or I need to improve my stats, right? But that's different from self-criticism, which is sort of that beating ourselves up, which, again, the majority of people are doing and don't even realize it's a problem. It's a real problem that's keeping them from where they want to be. That's just one example of what sovereignty is.
Is that a US-based phenomena, or is that a worldwide phenomena on how people talk to themselves?
Most of the audiences I talk to endorse this type of relationship with themselves. You know, we talk about toxic workplaces, toxic relationships. Most people are walking around in a toxic relationship with themselves. And that's one example. Another example is emotions. I teach emotional intelligence as well. And most people will say that when they have big, bad, negative emotions, they suppress them. You know, they just like push them down. That's what the world is up to, right? And we have so many temptations to help us numb our feelings, whether it's entertainment or booze or work, or, you know, it can look healthy, you know, whatever it is, over exercising. But all those, we've just not learned how to cope with our negative emotions. We've never, like you said, we haven't received training in money. We haven't received training in what to do with our negative emotions. So you can be at this high level leader who still doesn't know more than a 5-year-old about what to do with emotions because we've never been taught. And yet when you suppress your emotions, what actually happens is the emotion gets stronger and it lasts. You notice that a child will be angry for 2 minutes and then it's over. And they're best friends with the person they were mad at. But how long can an adult be angry for? A lifetime, right? And so emotional sovereignty is turning these kind of patterns around and no longer suppressing, which does involve experiencing the emotion and feeling it, among other things. I mean, I give a number of tools, but that's something that's really hard. It means you have to have the courage to go through the pain of whatever it is you're feeling. But on the other side of that is deliverance, and you're free, and you can be sovereign, you can be powerful, you can show up powerfully. Because we all know that, you know, the harder we are on ourselves, the more we suppress our frustration, so forth, that it ends up coming out in the people we love the most and want to hurt the least, or our closest colleagues, most important colleagues. Not that you want to vent your emotions out, but it's the you know, feeling it to heal it. That's one of the aspects of emotional sovereignty. And emotions play a big role in our relationships at work as well as at home.
Oh, I'm sure that they do. I want to take a step back, though. How do we turn off that negative voice in our head?
Yeah.
How do we tame that?
Mm-hmm. That's such a good, it's such a good question. I like to keep things really simple and pragmatic. If you have do you have a child? Have you
I
had
have
children?
2. They're grown and out of the house now, but yes,
Yeah.
I've been through the growth of that.
So when they were 5, 6, 7, you were aware of when was the last time they ate, when was the last time they drank, did they sleep enough, did they go outside, right? You have a sense. You have a pet, you have the same sort of sense. I just keep things really practical. How, you know, oftentimes we will get, you know, when you hear that you made a mistake or something, instead of asking, am I good enough, which is really what self-criticism asks, it puts you down and it's sort of questioning, am I good enough? And asking what's good for me right now. You know, and sometimes you've done something and it's a hard day. What you need is actually take a break, go outside, take a walk, you know, take a nap, you know, do the things, keep things really practical and even on the physical level to try and retrain yourself, that instead of beating yourself up or pushing yourself harder or, you know, distracting yourself with Netflix for 6 hours, which leaves you just leaving just as miserable after, doing something to fill your tank. It's reprogramming the brain to have a life supportive relationships. That's one example. I discuss a few, but that's one of the examples I think is very kind of a practical takeaway. What's good for me other than instead of, am I good enough?
And that makes sense. How quickly can we reprogram habits? Is it something that can be done in a couple weeks? Does it take months and years? Do we need to use I don't know, specialized ways, or is it just as simple as you kind of described it?
I think it depends, one, on how intentional you are about it and how much you want to do it. And two, if you're um, engaging in self-awareness exercises that help you even notice what's going on. Because we take in over 60,000 gigabytes of information every day. So our mind is chock full of stuff, right? And so you may not even aware that you're feeling burnt out, tired, and hungry, and you're now reacting in a certain way, or you're doing XYZ, or you're beating yourself up. If you're not aware of it, there's nothing you can do. So the most basic and important sort of self-awareness exercise you can do is contemplative activities like meditation, breathing exercises, or even just going outside and being in nature without your phone, or just moments where you are with yourself. Like, our whole modern life has trained us to be disconnected from ourselves. We're constantly on our devices, listening to things, engaged, hyper busy, disconnect, and then the self-criticism. It's all disconnection. So this is about, how do I find moments in my day where I consciously am connecting with myself, and that's how self-awareness grows.
As you were describing this, I'm thinking back to the other question, and I'm thinking back, yeah, when the kids are little and they're tired and they're hungry, they're cranky as can all be, right?
Right.
And and maybe what's happened is, as adults, they're full of caffeine,
Right.
and they can't they can't be cranky, so it becomes an internal cranky, and it
Yes.
makes a lot of sense why that happens. And
Absolutely.
it,
And
in
even the whole
today's world,
caffeine
I think
thing, it's like, sometimes we forget to question things if everybody's doing it. It's like, why? Why do you have to live on caffeine? Oh, because I'm tired. Well, why are you tired? Well, I'm tired because I'm constantly burning at both ends. Okay, well, let's go back to the root of the problem, or I eat junk food, or I've burned myself out over 20 years now. I can't make it through the day without something. But it's like, it's just I'm inviting people to question things.
and you're seeing that type of behavior with highly successful leaders in companies.
Absolutely, yeah. And not just, I mean, I think it's a very widespread. You could be a stay-at-home mom burning the candle both ends, feeling I got to do. And it's interesting. There's this. So the Yale students are like the epitome of these sort of highly successful overachiever type people. And when my colleagues ask them, so how do you feel every day? You would think they feel successful, happy, proud. The emotions were stressed and tired. And then when they were asked, what do you want to feel? Guess what they wanted to feel?
Happy and rested.
Loved, loved. And, this goes to illustrate overachievers everywhere. I always feel like people who are burning themselves out, at one point they experienced conditional love, maybe when they were young, whatever. But then there's a sense of, I am what I do, and I must constantly do in order to get what I want. And yet no amount of success, accolades, achievements, even love from others will make up for a lack of love from yourself. And that's why, people can have it all and yet feel so anxious and depressed and don't understand why.
And that goes back to what you were talking about when you were living in France. I'm not enough. And if you're not enough, you don't feel loved.
Right.
Everything comes back to that simple beginning part. And especially going back to childhood, kids are always craving their parents' love. And if they don't have the respect of one of the parents, then it creates this lifelong chain of trying to be successful to prove to a parent that they are something, and it never seems to work out well.
Yeah. And it's, and the answer to that is not more achievements, because that doesn't really ever fill ever repair that hole in their heart. But what can is actually having a life supportive relationship with oneself. Because at the end of the day, the only relationship you're guaranteed for the rest of your life is with yourself, 24/7. And do you want it to be a toxic one or a good one? And when it's a good one and a life supportive one, you're going to be able to show up at your fullest potential and probably be successful beyond even your dreams, because you're supporting yourself as opposed to beating yourself up. I always think How are you going to show up on the battlefield of your life? Limping and burnt out because you beat yourself on the way there? Or in brand spanking new armor because you loved yourself on the way there? You took care of yourself on the way there. And that's something that's quite contrary to how people are living and thinking. And yet it makes so much sense, doesn't it?
It does. And actually, with the advances in medicine and lifespan, I'm thinking if I'm going to live a longer, healthier life, it's got to be worth living, right? Nobody wants more of misery.
Right?
And so you've got to make the changes so that you can enjoy life and live it out further. Before we hit record, you talked about a concept of inner versus outer sovereignty,
Mm-hmm.
and how without inner sovereignty, it doesn't matter if you're rich and you have all the wealth and all the success. Can you explain that topic a little bit?
So imagine that you just got to a dream vacation in Hawaii or some other beautiful beach, right? And you got your feet sinking in the warm sand. It's sunset. It's basically paradise. But for some reason, you're upset. So you're upset. And it doesn't matter that you're on the beach in Hawaii at sunset because you're upset. See that your mind is more important than the environment. Similarly, you could be stuck in traffic, no end in sight. You don't have anything to eat or drink, but you got the music on, you're dancing, and it's all good. And I think we had moments maybe like that in the pandemic, days that were the exact same days as the days prior, but we were doing just fine. And on some days we were not, right? So what's the difference? It's the state of your mind. And that's the beauty of this, because the quality of your life depends on the state of your mind, not on your environment. So and that's, I think, the power of that, building that inner sovereignty. Yes, it's wonderful to have outer sovereignty. It's wonderful to have money and wealth and power, all the things, for sure. Like, everyone should go for their dreams with regard to that. But if you don't have inner sovereignty, if you're miserable on the inside, it almost doesn't matter, because what we really want is to feel that inner level of peace, contentment, happiness. And that can't actually come to us from the outside. Having looked at the signs of happiness for the last 10 years, I can summarize in one sentence that the happiest people are the people who have lived lives of characterized by compassion in some ways. Doesn't mean you have to be beating orphans in Somalia or anything, but that in some way you're contributing to others' lives in a way that's meaningful to you, balanced with self-compassion, balanced with the life supportive relationship with your own self. And that is what the research shows is really leads to the most fulfilled lives. But what's interesting is that, whatever service or perhaps donation, whatever you're making, it can't be, if it's done for selfish purposes, like I want my name on the plaque, or I'm doing this to be happier, it actually backfires and doesn't work, which is interesting. It really does have to come from a place of authenticity.
It's funny because I was just reading a book on employee compensation. And in the book, they were talking about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And when you started paying people more than they were worth, it became an extrinsic motivator, and they started working less. Like the quality of their work went down because you were paying them more, which is the opposite of what you would expect. And it's because
Right.
they no longer had the value or the care of doing the work. Now it was just like, give me the money, whatever, and it kind of robbed them of that internal part. So you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but how much is technology creating an issue with all of this?
I think that technology is, if used without awareness, can take you out of your present moment, out of your focus, out of your ability to tap into yourself and into your greatest sort of thoughts. Like if you think about creativity, for example, CEOs across industries, across countries, the number one thing they look for in incoming employees is creativity, because if you can't create, you can't innovate. It doesn't matter how much integrity you have or how well you work, how hard you work, right? But think about, when do you get your most creative ideas or your aha moments to difficult problems you're working on in your life? Like, when do you come up with those, Rocky?
In the
What kind of
shower.
activities? In the shower. Yeah, exactly. In the shower. People talk about taking a walk or doing something irrelevant to work, right? what happens then is our brain goes into alpha wave mode. So it's not highly focused. It's not totally relaxed. It's like in between space. That's when we're most receptive, or you can think of it as the brain is in active problem solving mode. And that is when you're going to get your most innovative ideas. And, so many companies out there are trying to create more innovation among their staff. And yet they keep them at desks stressed out and, maybe micromanaged or at least overburdened with work. That's not how you're going to get the best innovation, but also out of yourself. So if you're constantly on your phone from the moment you wake up, you're stopping yourself from being in that alpha wave mode because you're in this hyper-focused mode, which is preventing you from coming up with your best ideas. So that's just one example.
Speaking of school, they've actually looked at creativity in kids, and when they walk into school at 5 or 6, the creativity is extremely high percentage wise, and very quickly it declines. By the time they get to college, it's almost non-existent.
I know.
It has been, I don't know, beaten out of them or programmed out of them or whatever you want to call it.
Mm.
And so it's probably going to be hard for employers to find people with it because it hasn't been rewarded. And even most employers don't always reward creativity, because if you do something different, 98% of people are going to say that's not the way we do it here. That, we've always done it this way. Creativity is actually kind of rebelled against it in most places.
Yeah, it's a good point. And that creativity crisis is so sad and so true. I mean, I have currently a 6 and a 9-year-old, and they're both very creative. And I think about, I don't want them to lose that, I mean, I've kept them off screens, and I plan to keep them off screens as long as I can. But definitely we have an education system that prioritizes logic and reason, which is great. But at the risk of cutting out creativity and intuition. So, and I talk about intuition in my new book, Sovereign, because research shows that we all have the ability to be more sovereign. So, yeah, Einstein said intuition is a gift or a divine gift or something like that. And logic is a faithful servant. We've created a society that worships the servant and has thrown away the gift. And if you look at it from a scientific perspective of, we get these aha moments in these, when our brain is in alpha wave mode. And when we're only training kids for rationality and reason, we're training them out of the ability for that innovative, intuitive mindset. And at the same time, if we keep people on devices, the same thing happens because they're constantly focused. So we got to really rethink. And regaining sovereignty over your own potential is, and I have a whole chapter on intuition because there's a lot of research behind it. Neuroscience, the military studied it, and this ability to be innovative is really a powerful potential that we all have if we allow ourselves to access it and know how to.
I guess I was lucky with my kids when they were your kids' age. The iPhone was just barely coming out, so they didn't have that kind of screen time. And the one thing that I got them, we found a stack of Lego blocks. So they weren't a set. There was no instructions. It was just hundreds upon hundreds of random pieces, and said, have fun.
Yeah.
And later, when my son got older in high school, he was involved in robotics. And in robotics, they're like, look, here's the goal. Here are the rules. You can use anything you want. And there's actually a part supplier that a lot of these engineers use. It's called McMaster Parts. My son he didn't live on Amazon. He'd be ordering screws and different types of metals and learning how to create and play with all this stuff and bring it all together to make it work, to create a task. And I think it helped him dramatically leap ahead of everybody else, just in the way he thinks.
Yeah, but absolutely. That's wonderful that you did that. Nurtured his creativity.
Yeah, part of it was accidental. Part of it was intentional. I mean, I didn't know what I know today, so I can't take credit for it back then. But I knew some stuff was common sense. Like, hey, these are the things that they're talking about. and this is what everyone says they want, but yet nobody's showing kids or teaching kids how to do it. So you just have to create the opportunities where they themselves will go forward. So they're pulling us, we're not pushing them.
Right.
And I think that makes it so much easier for parents. Now,
Absolutely.
the other thing is we're living in uncertain times, right? We've got economic woes. Parts of the world are fighting with other parts of the world. All of this stuff comes up. So I think it's probably causing anxiety and fear in people. And I know for me, I hate uncertainty. I'm getting better with it, but that in itself can create more anxiety. How do you suggest people work through that?
I mean, the only thing we know for sure is that things are always changing. That's one thing we know. And our environment's changing, our body's changing, our life is changing constantly. But there's a steadiness that we can have in the storm, and that's the internal, like I was talking earlier, that internal sovereignty, that ability to stay grounded and centered. And that is something that you can train into your nervous system. So I've conducted research with people who are highly stressed, veterans with combat trauma, and using a breathing technique called sky breath meditation, it not only reduced their trauma, but helped retrain their nervous system. So if you think about it, even our daily life, we're trained to be in fight or flight. Like we're really trained to activate our stress response. We're really good at that. But we are not trained for the opposite, which is the calming response, the parasympathetic nervous system. And what our research has found is that using a breathing practice, you can retrain your nervous system to be calmer and to be more resilient in the face of stress. And this is a breathing practice called sky breath meditation that we researched. It's offered for veterans and military at no cost through a nonprofit called Project Welcome Home Troops. And then for everyone else, it's offered through a nonprofit called Art of Living, which is like a nonprofit started in India that uses a lot of yoga-based breathing, but it's quite a unique methodology. What my colleagues and I have found is that when placed in a stressful situation, people who have trained in this breathing practice end up with more resilience than others because they've trained their nervous system to be calmer. And I think that's really powerful. And meditation is another tool that can help with this. And I think it's key, in a time when things are moving so fast, accelerating so much, and stress levels are so high, we need something to counterbalance it that's equally extreme, which is sitting, closing your eyes, and training yourself for that inner stillness, but also training yourself for connection with yourself.
And is that, I do a lot of different breathing techniques. A lot of them are based on cyclical rhythms like, 4 in, hold 4, 8 out, those types of patterns. Is that the same concept of what the sky meditation is?
The sky breath meditation has a number of breathing practices together. And and that's why I kind of think of it as a protocol. You have to learn it with an instructor over like 2-3 days over Zoom. They have them all the time. And so it's not like I love the shorter breathing practices that you're talking about. I think they're very useful in the moment. And then that protocol, I would say, is good for sort of conditioning your nervous system. Like we condition our muscles so we can be stronger, right, outside the gym, but you can condition your nervous system so you can be more resilient or calmer outside of that time too.
And I took a nervous system mastery course last year.
Oh, great.
And as part of that, a lot of the different things were different breathing techniques, and then stacking the breathing techniques together, one on top of the other, figuring out what works for you and looking at sympathetic activation versus parasympathetic activation and watching that. And I have an HRV monitor, so it kind of tells me every morning, you're this way or that way, and you need to relax, or you can go a little bit harder. And then I found a breathing app that also has hundreds, if not thousands, of different breathing things on there. And so
fantastic.
Just this morning, I think I did one that was about 60 minutes long. And to think about breathing for 60 minutes, when I first started, I was like, how am I going to do this? Nowadays, it's like, Oh, I got up early today. I might as well knock one of these out. And it's impressive how much it you can feel the energy and the change in your body by following all of these rhythmic patterns
Yes.
and doing different ones. And so it's been still playing, still learning, still trying to pay attention in the moment
Yeah.
and work through it. But yeah, it's definitely amazing how all of that kind of comes together, which that also comes back to energy management. And we really haven't, is there something more than just sleep to energy management?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, if you are constantly running at high stress, chronically elevated stress, you're going to be burning through your energy much faster. For example, it's like if you're taking your phone and you're doing a million things at once on it, and you're going to burn through the battery. So one key aspect to energy management is trying to cultivate more calm and more peace in your inner nervous system, because then you're not burning yourself out as quickly. You know, how many people have a hard time going to sleep at night and then wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, or exhausted after lunch at 2 p.m. You know, that's all signs of adrenal fatigue. Just having this a nervous system that has been run too hard, too fast, too long. And so if we want to, why are people tired when they come home from work at 6, 7 o'clock? It's like, were you laying bricks all day? Nope. Just sitting at the computer, right? And it's 100% due to the high intensity of our lives. Now, a lot of stress cannot be helped. Like you have an aging parent you've got to take care of, or little kids, or financial difficulties, health difficulties, etc. But whatever stress you're piling on because you're over caffeinating, over scheduling yourself, believing in these go mode, having a toxic relationship with yourself, etc., those are ways that you're adding on. And that's where I invite people to question those and think about doing things differently so they can have more sovereignty over their life.
And that makes a lot of sense. I think, it comes back to being aware, paying attention, and then, you know, I think a lot of people don't realize that they don't have to do this. Like that they can step out, that they can
Right.
stop, that they can just say no. No, I'm not doing that.
That's right.
No, I'm not killing myself. And no,
That's right.
I'm not going to. And I think the end result, though, from what I've seen, is not only are they happier, but they are also wealthier, which is kind of counterintuitive, right? And I know we kind of talked about that at the beginning, where you found a lot of things that we were told that are just not true. And I think this is probably another one of those.
Absolutely. And, thanks for bringing that up, because I think a lot of what sovereignty is realizing the ways that you're living or thinking that are not true, despite what anyone might have said, and to question those. And so, I taught some Yale students, and I was telling them about having this kind of discussion we're having right now. And one of the students said, "Hey, what got me here was burning myself into the ground. Why should I believe you?" And I said, "Don't believe me. Believe the science, but don't even believe the science. Look at your own life. Try this for a week. For a week, try to have a life supportive relationship with yourself. And he did. And the following week he came back and I said, "So how was it?" And he said, "I took time. I slept enough. I went to the gym. And he said, I listened to the birds." I remember him saying that specifically. And he said, "I got more things done better." So, of course, being in a more life supportive relationship with yourself, you're going to show up. When you do show up, you're going to show up like $1 million. You're going to show up, able to show up 100%, as opposed to, the burnt out ways that we can show up and just perform in a more mediocre way.
And so, one of the lies we were told, maybe the science, is multitasking doesn't really work, which comes back to what you're talking about, being more intentional and focused in the moment.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, and it's like charisma, right? There's this sense, what's charisma? It's this sort of God-given gift to the lucky few, right? But when you look at what charisma is, people say, "Oh, well, around someone charismatic, they made me feel like I was the only person in the room." It's like, well, how do people do that? When you look at the science, it's not a special quality. It's the ability to be fully present with another person. And that has become so rare that when someone is fully present with you, it's something you never forget. It's very powerful. Think of yourself as a leader. When you show up for your team and your mind's all over the place and you're not present, can they tell? Oh, yeah, they can tell. Are they impressed? Oh, no, they're not impressed. Do they feel seen, heard, valued, respected for their work? Nope, they don't. Do they feel connected to you? Nope, they don't. But if you show up present, calm, focused, attentive, that's when you make an impact.
That is so true. And I think that was talked about in a book I read a long time ago called The Charisma Myth. I'm not sure where she was out of.
I know Olivia Cabani. I know her.
Yeah. Is she out of Yale or is she out of somewhere else, I think?
She's in the Stanford area.
Okay. I knew she was at one of the schools. And it was interesting to read all of that. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Cultivating inner peace through meditation and unplugging, time in nature, and gratitude, remembering everything I'm grateful for.
Gratitude seems to come up as the number one answer to the question. So people need to go practice. What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
To have a life-supportive relationship with myself.
So if you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
To follow their inner voice and not believe all the things that they're told.
If people would like to learn more about you, your books, your work, where is the best place for them to find all of that?
Yeah, my books are on Amazon or anywhere books are sold, and Sovereign is my latest one. And I'm on Instagram at The Happiness Track, and my website is myfullname.com, and I'm on most of the social media apps.
Awesome. And we'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Rocky. I appreciate it.
Thanks for checking out this unedited video of the Richer Soul podcast. You can find the full episode along with all the back episodes at richersoul.com. This podcast is brought to you by Profit Comes First, where we help business owners to have a more profitable and growing business so they can live the life of their dreams. Check that out as well wherever you listen to all this content.